On February 25, 2026, Representative Thomas Massie from Kentucky stood on the House floor and did something most members of Congress avoid. He named specific people he believes should be investigated based on evidence in the Epstein Files, not vague references to powerful individuals, not calls for thorough investigations, specific names, specific allegations, specific questions about why the Department of Justice hasn't acted. This matters because over 3 million documents have been released. Foreign governments have made arrests. CEOs have resigned. But in the United States, according to Massie, there have been no arrests and no announced investigations stemming from the Epstein Files. The contrast isn't subtle. Europe is prosecuting. America is silent. Massie's statement raises an uncomfortable question. Is the evidence different in the files American authorities reviewed versus what European investigators saw? Or is the difference in the response? Watch how he framed it.
The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massie, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Congress created the Department of Justice. Congress funds the Department of Justice. And Congress is responsible for the oversight of the Department of Justice. When will we see justice? I'll tell you what I've not seen. I've not seen any arrests from the revelations in the Epstein Files, over 3 million documents describing horrible things, describing unspeakable things, so much of it redacted. Over 24 people have resigned, CEOs, members of government worldwide. But I haven't seen any arrests or investigations here in the United States from this Department of Justice. Prince Andrew, Duke of York, who has since been stripped of his royalty, his royal titles, due to his affiliation with Jeffrey Epstein, has been arrested. Peter Mandelson, who previously served as UK's ambassador to the United States, resigned in disgrace from United Kingdom's House of Lords and the Labour Party, and he's been arrested. Former Prime Minister of Norway, Torbjørn Jagland, has been charged, but we don't see any charges, arrests, or investigations in the United States. What do we see? We see our FBI director celebrating in the locker room at the Olympics overseas. It's fine to be proud of this country, but we should be proud of this country because we have a system of justice that works, and yet we do not. Who are the men that should be investigated? I'll name them right here. Leon Black. You don't even have to see past the redactions to see that this man needs to be investigated. Jess Staley, accused of terrible things. It's right there in the files. Why is he not being investigated? And Leslie Wexner, why did the FBI list him as a co-conspirator in their own documents in a child sex trafficking case and then tell him, according to him, that they had no questions for him? Why is that? Well, the Epstein Files Transparency Act requires the DOJ and the FBI to disclose to us their internal memos and emails about how they made those decisions, whether to prosecute or not prosecute. Yet they have not delivered those memos. And we still don't have the memos and documents and emails from 2008 to explain why Jeffrey Epstein was given such a light sentence in what would have been an open and shut case of child sex trafficking, which allowed him to go back and recommit these terrible crimes, create hundreds of more victims, and ensnare so many other people in his conspiracy. Where are those documents that describe those decisions? We need justice. We want the Department of Justice to get to work, and that's what they need to do now. Madam Speaker, I rise today to let the American people know that this government is under siege. All 3 branches of this government is under siege by lobbyists and lawyers from a German company named Bayer. They spent over $9 million lobbying the executive branch and the legislative branch so that they don't have to be liable for any damages that their herbicide causes, otherwise known as Roundup. And they're having some success. Now, they haven't had any success yet in this chamber to get that immunity. They've had some success in the state legislatures, which are also under siege, to get this immunity from liability.
Massie opens with a jurisdictional assertion. Congress created the DOJ, funds it, and oversees it. That framing establishes that his demands aren't just political complaints. They're backed by constitutional authority. Then he lays out the accountability gap. Over 3 million documents released. Over 24 people have resigned worldwide, CEOs, government officials. But in the United States, no arrests, no announced investigations. He cites 3 specific cases from other countries. Prince Andrew was arrested in the UK on February 19, 2026, on suspicion of misconduct in public office, specifically allegations that he shared confidential government information with Epstein while serving as Britain's trade envoy. Peter Mandelson resigned from the House of Lords and was arrested. Mandelson had served as UK ambassador to the United States. Documents in the Epstein Files appeared to show him sharing confidential UK government information with Epstein. Thorbjorn Jagland, former Prime Minister of Norway, has been charged with aggravated corruption related to his connections documented in the Epstein Files. That's 3 high-profile figures from allied democracies facing legal consequences. In the United States, according to Massie, nothing. Then Massie names 3 Americans who he believes should be investigated: Leon Black, Jess Staley, and Leslie Wexner. These aren't random names. Leon Black is a billionaire financier who was CEO of Apollo Global Management. After the Epstein Files release, reporting showed Black had paid Epstein $158 million for what Black described as tax and estate planning advice. Jess Staley was the CEO of Barclays. He resigned in 2021 amid an investigation into his relationship with Epstein. The Epstein Files contain extensive documentation of their communications. Leslie Wexner is the founder of L Brands, parent company of Victoria's Secret. Epstein managed Wexner's fortune for years. Massie's specific claim about Wexner is striking. The FBI listed him as a co-conspirator in their own documents in a child sex trafficking case, then told him they had no questions for him. That claim, if accurate, suggests the FBI had evidence linking Wexner to trafficking, but chose not to pursue it. Massie then references the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which Congress passed with bipartisan support, requiring the DOJ and FBI to disclose internal memos and emails about prosecution decisions. According to Massie, those memos have not been delivered. He also demands documents from 2008, the year Epstein received what Massie calls such a light sentence in what would have been an open and shut case of child sex trafficking. That's a reference to the non-prosecution agreement Epstein received in Florida, negotiated by then U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta. Epstein pleaded guilty to 2 state prostitution charges, served 13 months in a county jail with work release privileges, and the federal investigation was closed. Then Massie pivots. Without transition, he shifts from the Epstein Files to what he calls a government under siege by Bayer, the German pharmaceutical and chemical company. The issue is Roundup, Bayer's herbicide containing glyphosate, which has been the subject of tens of thousands of lawsuits alleging it causes cancer. Bayer has spent over $9 million lobbying the executive and legislative branches, according to Massie, seeking immunity from liability. The connection isn't immediately obvious, but it becomes clear. Both segments are about accountability, or the lack of it. Watch what comes next.
Look, the Constitution guarantees people a trial if they've been harmed. Why are we contemplating going against the Constitution? The Attorney General has opined favorably for this German company in front of the Supreme Court about getting rid of any liability that they should have for any damages. And the most recent thing that we've seen, the executive branch. By the way, the President's Chief of Staff and the President's Attorney General worked for one of the biggest lobbying firms that's received hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars from Bayer. And maybe that's why we've seen an executive order that says that the production of this chemical from this German company is a national defense priority. And we know why they're doing that. It's to keep them from having any liability. Everybody in this country deserves their day in court. This is wrong. We shouldn't succumb to the lobbyists, not in the executive branch, not in the judicial branch, and certainly not here in Congress, and not in the state legislatures. But there's a lot of money at play, and I implore my colleagues to resist it and do not give them immunity. And I yield back.
The chair recognizes the woman from Minnesota, Ms. Morrison, for 5 minutes.
Massie makes specific allegations about conflicts of interest. First, He claims the Attorney General has opined favorably for Bayer in front of the Supreme Court about eliminating their liability for damages. If the current Attorney General previously represented Bayer or argued on their behalf before joining the administration, that would raise conflict of interest questions about their involvement in decisions affecting Bayer's legal exposure. Second, he states that the President's Chief of Staff and the Attorney General both previously worked for one of the biggest lobbying firms that has received hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of dollars from Bayer. This is verifiable through lobbying disclosure records and employment histories. Then Massie points to an executive order designating the production of this chemical as a national defense priority. The Defense Production Act allows the President to require companies to prioritize contracts necessary for national defense. It can also provide liability protections for companies producing designated materials. If Roundup production has been designated a national defense priority, that classification could potentially be used to argue for liability limitations in ongoing litigation. Massie's interpretation is that this designation isn't about national defense. It's about shielding Bayer from legal accountability to American citizens harmed by their product. Several states have considered or passed legislation limiting liability for manufacturers of products deemed essential, which could potentially apply to agricultural chemicals like Roundup. The through line between the Epstein segment and the Bayer segment becomes clear. Both are about powerful entities escaping accountability. In the Epstein case, it happens through DOJ inaction. Documents exist, names are known, foreign governments prosecute, but no American charges are filed. In the Bayer case, it happens through active lobbying, millions spent to obtain statutory immunity, executive orders providing legal cover, former lobbyists now in government positions, making decisions that affect their former client. Different mechanisms, same result, no accountability. What Massie presented is a case study in how accountability gets blocked at the highest levels. With the Epstein Files, it's inaction, 3 million documents describing crimes, over 24 resignations worldwide, arrests in the UK and Norway, but the U.S. Department of Justice announces no investigations of the Americans Massie named. With Bayer, it's active capture, $9 million in lobbying, former industry lawyers now running the Justice Department, executive orders creating legal shields. The Epstein portion raises specific unanswered questions. Why haven't Leon Black, Jess Staley, or Leslie Wexner been charged if evidence in the files supports investigation? Why did the FBI list Wexner as a co-conspirator, but then decline to interview him? Where are the internal DOJ memos explaining prosecution decisions, which the Transparency Act requires Congress to receive? Where are the 2008 documents explaining how Epstein got a deal that let him serve 13 months and then reoffend for years? The Bayer portion raises different but related questions. Did the Attorney General represent Bayer before the Supreme Court, before joining the administration? Did the Chief of Staff work for a lobbying firm paid millions by Bayer? Was Roundup production designated a national defense priority to provide legal cover against liability? Are state legislatures passing immunity laws at Bayer's request? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're verifiable. The prosecutions Massie cited are real. Prince Andrew was arrested. Peter Mandelson was arrested. Thorbjorn Jagland was charged. Those actions are based on the same Epstein files the U.S. Department of Justice reviewed. The difference isn't the evidence, it's the response. Massie's floor speech won't trigger immediate DOJ action. Congressional speeches rarely do, but it puts specific claims on the congressional record. The DOJ can respond or stay silent. The required memos can be delivered or withheld. The Attorney General's Bayer representation can be confirmed or denied. The executive order's justification can be explained or left vague. What can't happen is dismissing these questions as partisan when Massie is citing foreign prosecutions, naming specific individuals backed by public reporting, and referencing statutory disclosure requirements Congress itself passed. The accountability gap isn't abstract. It's measurable in arrests made abroad and silence at home. If this kind of coverage matters to you, hit subscribe.